Hello, students. Today we are going to continue with the chapter The Enemy, third part of it. And those who have not seen the first two parts, go and see them, and then only you will be able to understand this part. And rest of you, let us begin with the video. In the last video, I left where Hannah she called out to Sadao very softly, and Sadao he was on the door. And when he opened the door, Hannah saw that Sadao was carrying his surgeon's emergency bag and was wearing his surgeon's coat and was ready to operate upon the injured man. So, seeing this, Hannah cried that you have decided to operate. Yes, he said shortly. He turned his back to her and unfolded a sterilized towel upon the floor of the tokonoma alcove and put his instruments out upon it. Sterilized means disinfected. Tokonoma alcove. In English, tokonoma is actually called alcove. It is a part of a room where things are displaced, a niche or an alcove in a Japanese home for displaying a flower arrangement, kakemono or other piece of art. So on the floor of such kind of a room where the things are displayed, uh, Sadao he took out all his surgical instrument on it. Fetch towels, he said. So he asked Anna to get some towels. She went obediently, but how anxious now, to the linen shelves and took out the towels. There ought also to be old pieces of matting so that the blood would not ruin the fine floor covering. Ruin means destroy. She went out to the back veranda where the gardener kept strips of matting with which to protect delicate shrubs on cold nights and took an armful of them. So Hannah obeyed Sadao and went out to get the towels. She was curious as Sadao was operating upon the injured man. She thought that the blood from his wounds could stain the fine mats which covered the floor of the room. So she got some rough mats from the backyard which were used by the gardener to cover the delicate shrubs from the cold weather. But when she went back into the room, she saw this was useless. The blood had already soaked through the packing in the man's wound and had ruined the mat under him. So by the time Hannah reached the room, she saw that blood had flowed through the bandage on the from the man's wounds and had stained the mat beneath him. Her effort was futile. Her efforts of saving the mat was futile. Oh, the mat, she cried. Yes, it is ruined, Sadao replied as though he did not care. Help me to turn him, he commanded her. She obeyed him without a word and he began to wash the man's back carefully. So, on seeing the stained mat, Hannah cried that the mat had been spoiled. Sadao agreed that the mat had been ruined in such a manner which indicated that he was not bothered by it. Then he ordered Hannah to help him turn the man over. She obeyed him, and then Sadao started washing his back. Yumi would not wash him, she said. Did you wash him then? Sadao asked, not stopping for a moment his swift, concise movement. Concise means short. So Hannah told Sadao that Yumi had refused to wash the injured man. Sadao asked her that did she wash him. He did not stop cleaning him. He made fast, small movements of his hands as he cleaned him carefully. Yes, she said. He did not seem to hear her, but she was used to his absorption when he was at work. She wondered for a moment if it mattered to him what was the body upon which he worked so long as it was for the work he did so excellently. So Sadao was engrossed in work and did not seem to hear Hannah. Hannah wondered that Sadao was not bothered who the injured man was. He was only concerned in performing his work well. So she knew that when he was absorbed in his work, he did not listen anybody with concentration, and she also knew that he it did not matter to him, or it did not bother him whether the injured man was an enemy or a friend. His only concern was to perform his work well. You will have to give the anesthetic if he needs, he said. Anesthetic is a substance that induces insensitivity to pain. I? She repeated blankly. But never have I. Blankly means without understanding. So Sadao told Hannah that she would have to inject the injured man with a substance that induces insensitivity to pain, means she has to give anesthesia to the injured man. Hannah replied that she had never done that earlier. It is easy enough, he said impatiently. So Sadao said in a hurry that it was very easy. He was taking out the packing now, and the blood began to flow more quickly. So, if you remember the packing, he had filled the wound with sea moss. He had packed the wound with sea moss, and now that packing was being taken out. So, when Sadao was removing the packing and the blood, it started flowing faster. He peered into the wound, means he looked closely into the wound with the bright surgeon's light fastened, means locked securely on his forehead. The bullet is still there, he said with cool interest. Now I wonder how deep this rock wound is. If it is not too deep, it may be that I can get the bullet, but the bleeding is not superficial. He has lost much blood. Superficial means occurring at or on the surface. So the bleeding was not superficial, it was not on the surface only, it was deep inside. So, when he removed the packing, the blood started flowing faster, and he looked at the wound with the help of bright surgeon's light that was fixed on his forehead. He announced that the bullet was inside the man's body, and he wondered that how deep the wound made by the rock was. He said that if the wound was not very deep, then he could get the bullet out. He added that the bleeding was not from the surface of the skin, which meant that the wound was deep and the man had already lost a lot of blood. At this moment, Hannah choked. Choked means she felt suffocated. He looked up and saw her face the color of sulfur. Her face the color of sulfur means it is a yellow, sulfur is a yellow colored element, and the clause means that her face it became pale yellowish in color. So when Hannah saw Sadao inspecting the wound, she could not see the sight, and she coughed. She felt suffocated, and Sadao looked at her and saw that her face was yellowish in color, like the color of sulfur. Don't faint, he said sharply. He did not put down his exploring instrument. If I stop now, the man will surely die. She clapped her hands to her mouth and leaped up and ran out of the room. Outside in the garden, he heard her retching, but he went on with his work. So now he reacted when he saw that Hannah was feeling suffocated and the color of her face changed. He ordered Hannah not to faint. He did not stop his work and continued inspecting the wound. Sadao said that if he stopped, the injured man would certainly die. Hannah, she put both her hands on her mouth, jumped up and ran out of the room, and Sadao could hear her vomiting in the garden, but he continued with his work. It will be better for her to empty her stomach, he thought. So Sadao felt that though he felt that Hannah needed his help at that time, but he couldn't leave the injured man, and he thought himself that it will be better for her to empty her stomach. And he had forgotten that, of course, she had never seen an operation, but her distress and his inability to go to her at once made him impatient and irritable with this man who lay like dead under his knife. Under his knife. Knife here means the instruments that were used during the operation. So, as Sadao needed Hannah's help to operate the man, he thought that it would be better for her to empty her stomach so that she would not feel uneasy time and again. And he was reminded that Hannah was seeing an operation for the first time and it was not a pleasant thing to see. Sadao was irritated and impatient as his wife was under stress and he was not able to help her due to the man who lay under his knife. He was just like a dead person. This man, he thought, there is no reason under heaven why he should live. So Sadao thought that there was no reason for him to make efforts to save the man because there was no reason for him to live. If he is saved, then he would be handed over to the Japanese army, then they will kill him, and if he doesn't treat him, then also he will die. So why he is making efforts to save this man? Because there is nobody is going to let him live. Unconsciously, this thought made him ruthless, means merciless, and he proceeded swiftly, means quickly. In his dream, the man moaned, but Sadao paid no heed, no attention, except to mutter at him. So Sadao, he became merciless and started working fast. The injured man, he cried in pain in state of unconsciousness, but Sadao, he kept on working without paying attention to the man's pain. Groan, he muttered, groan if you like. I'm not doing this for my own pleasure. In fact, I do not know why I'm doing it. Sadao said to the injured man that he was free to cry in pain. Sadao was not concerned that the man was in pain. He did not want to operate him and did not have any reason for doing so. The door opened and there was Hannah again. Where is the anesthetic? She asked in a clear voice. Sadao motioned with his chin. It is as well that you came back, he said. This fellow is beginning to stir. Beginning to stir means gaining consciousness. She had the bottle and some cotton in her hand. But how shall I do it? She asked. Simply saturate. Saturate means wet or soak the cotton and hold it near his nostrils. Sadao replied without delaying for one moment the intricate, means complicated detail of his work. Doing operation is not an easy job, you all know. When he breathes badly, move it away a little. So he instructed his wife that put this anesthesia before his nostril, and when he starts breathing very badly, then you move it away a little. So when Sadao was thinking that what he was doing and for what reason he was helping this man, the same moment Hannah, she entered the room and asked Sadao for the anesthetic which she had to administer to the injured man. Her voice was clear, which shows that now she was prepared to help him. Sadao moved his chin to guide her to the bottle of anesthetic. He added that it was good that she came as the man had started to gain consciousness and it was important to sedate him, means to give him sedative, to give him anesthesia. Hannah held the bottle and some cotton in her hands. She asked what she was supposed to do, and Sadao told her to put some anesthetic on the cotton and to place the cotton near the man's nostril. He did not stop his work and added that she should remove the cotton when the man started to breathe badly. Now she crouched close to the sleeping face of the young American. Crouched means to sit in a squatting position. You can see a picture on the left side, the way this pic has been shown of a crouched position. So Hannah, she crouched close to the sleeping face of the young American. It was a piteously means causing you to feel sad and sympathetic. So piteously thin face, she thought, and the lips were twisted, they were crumpled. The man was suffering, whether he knew it or not. Watching him, she wondered if the stories they heard sometimes of the sufferings of prisoners were true. They came like flickers of rumor. Flickers means quick movements of rumor told by word of mouth, means people tell it to each other rather than it being printed in written form. Mean the things they spread like rumors, and always contradicted means they were denied. In the newspapers, the reports were always that wherever the Japanese armies went, the people received them gladly with cries of joy at their liberation. But sometimes she remembered such men as General Takema, who at home beat his wife cruelly, though no one mentioned it now that he had fought so victorious a battle in Manchuria. Manchuria is the homeland of Manchu people. To the Chinese, the region is simply known as the Northeast. Manchuria is made up of China's three northeastern most provinces, that is Liaoning, Jilin, and Heilongjiang. So it is northeast China. So she says that, I mean, nobody knows that General Takima had fought so victorious a battle in Manchuria. And if a man like that could be so cruel to a woman in his part, would he not be cruel to one like this, for instance? So in this para, what Hannah is thinking, firstly, she sat in a squat and went close to the face of the sleeping American man. She felt sad and sympathetic towards him as she saw his thin face and twisted lips. She knew that he was suffering. She wondered whether the stories that she had heard about the torture meted out to the prisoners were true. The stories were like rumors which spread when people told them to others. On the other hand, in the printed media like the newspapers, it was mentioned that the Japanese army was welcomed wherever it went and people praised it for their freedom. Hannah, she recalled an officer of the Japanese army, General Takima, who was so cruel to his wife and would beat her. No one talked about it anymore as he had won the war in Manchuria. Hannah thought that if a man could be cruel towards his wife, then he could also be cruel to the prisoners in his captivity. So she was thinking about this American prisoner of war, that if that general is so much cruel to his own wife, then obviously he will not uh, be you can say he will also be cruel to the prisoners also who are in his captivity. He won't spare them, he won't leave them. She hoped anxiously that this young man had not been tortured. It was at this moment that she observed deep red scars on his neck just under the ear. So Hannah was hoping that the man had not been tortured by the army. The same moment she saw deep red colored marks, injury marks on his neck under the ear. Those scars, she murmured, lifting her eyes to Sadao, but he did not answer. At this moment, he felt the tip of his instrument strike against something hard, dangerously near the kidney. All thought left him. He felt only the purest pleasure. He probed means searched, with his fingers, delicately familiar with every atom of this human body. His old professor of anatomy is a branch of science concerned with the bodily structure of humans, animals, and other living organisms, especially as revealed by dissection and the separation of parts. So his anatomy professor had seen to that knowledge. Ignorance of the human body is the surgeon's cardinal sin. Sirs, cardinal means basic or first sin. He had thundered at his classes year after year. To operate without as complete knowledge of the body as if you had made it anything less than that is murder. So here Firstly, Hannah, she mentioned the scars to Sadao and asked about them. Sadao did not answer. At that moment, the tip of his instrument hit something hard, and that was the bullet, which was very close to the kidney. Sadao was not thinking of anything else. He was happy to have finally found the bullet. He moved his fingers inside the wound. Sadao, he was familiar with the tiniest part of the human body. It says not that he was familiar with every atom of this human body, means he knew every nook and corner of the human body. His professor of anatomy in America had told them that if a surgeon ignored the knowledge of any part of the body, it was the first misdeed that he had committed. Means a doctor not knowing any part of the body or ignored any part, knowledge of any part of the body, that was his cardinal sin or the first sin he had committed. Now, to operate upon a body without detailed knowledge of it, as much as the person who makes it has, would amount to committing murder of that body. And Sadao's professor would repeat these words in his class often. So he remembers the words of his anatomy teacher, professor, and he would also say that operating without complete knowledge of the body is like committing a murder. Obviously, when a doctor is not having complete knowledge of human body and he is allowed to do to operate upon a human body, then he is obviously going to commit a murder, because the person will get killed at his hands, and it is no less than a murder. And it is not quite at the kidney, my friend Sadao murmured. Sadao murmured. It was his habit to murmur to the patient when he forgot himself in an operation. My friend, he always called his patient, and so now he did, forgetting that this was his enemy. So, here Sadao, he spoke to the injured man. He said that the bullet had just missed his kidney. When Sadao would get engrossed in the operation, he would start talking to the patient. He addressed the patient as my friend. He called the injured man also my friend, and he forgot that this man was not a friend but an enemy. Then, quickly, with the cleanest and most precise means accurate, of incisions means surgical cuts, the bullet was out. The man quivered, means shivered, but he was still unconscious. Nevertheless, he muttered, spoke a few English words. So, Sadao was very quick in his actions. He made a few surgical cuts on the body and removed the bullet. The man trembled in pain but remained unconscious. He spoke a few words in English, which were an expression of the pain that he was experiencing. Guts, he muttered, choking. They got my guts. Sadao, Hannah cried sharply. Hush, Sadao said. The man sank again into silence, so profound, means deep, intent, that Sadao took up the wrist, hating the touch of it. Yes, there was still a pulse, so faint, so feeble. Feeble means weak, but enough if he wanted the man to live, to give hope. So the injured man, he choked, he suffocated, and said, "Guts. They got my guts." He meant that he was brave and courageous, and the Japanese army would have a tough time while punishing him. Upon hearing him, Hannah cried out to Sadao. Sadao hushed her to keep quiet. The man became so quiet that Sadao held his wrist to check his heartbeat. He was checking if the man was still alive. His pulse was there, although it was very weak. Sadao thought that it was enough for a person who had a desire to live. There was still hope that the man would survive. But certainly, I do not want this man to live, he thought. Sadao was sure that he did not want the man to live, because he knew that if he survives, Obviously, he will be killed by the Japanese. No more anesthetic, he told Hannah. He turned as swiftly as though he had never paused, and from his medicines he chose a small vial. Vial is a small container used especially for holding liquid medicines. Small vial, and from it filled a hypodermic. Hypodermic is a needle, or you can say injection, and thrust it. Thrust means pushed into the patient's left arm. Then, putting down the needle, he took the man's wrist again. The pulse under his fingers fluttered, means they trembled once or twice and then grew stronger. So here Sadao, he stopped Hannah from administering anesthetic, and he turned quickly and chose a small bottle from the medicines and filled a syringe with the medicine and pushed the vaccine into the man's left arm. Sadao placed the needle down and held the man's wrist, and the pulse shivered once or twice, and then it grew stronger, means it improved, means his pulse they started increasing. This man will live in spite of all, he said to Hannah and sighed. The young man woke so weak, his blue eyes so terrified when he perceived where he was, that Hannah felt compelled to apologize. She herself served him, for none of the servants would enter the room. Perceived means became aware, compelled means forced, apologize means feel sorry. So when his pulse it improved, Sadao took a deep breath as he told Hannah that the injured man would live. He woke up, his blue colored eyes were full of fright as he realized where he was. Hannah felt sorry for him. She served him food as the servants refused to enter the room where he was kept. When she came in the first time, she saw him summon. Summon means to gather his small strength to be prepared for some fearful thing. So when Hannah she met the injured man for the first time, she saw that the man was gathering strength and he was full of fear. Don't be afraid, she begged him softly. How come you speak English? He gasped. Gasped means uttered with difficulty. I was a long time in America, she replied. She saw that he wanted to reply to that, but he could not, and so she knelt, means sat on her knees, and fed him gently from the porcelain spoon. Porcelain spoon means the spoon made of china clay. He ate unwillingly, but still he ate. So when Hannah she came inside, she said softly to the injured man that he should not be afraid. He was astonished that she could speak English. Hannah replied that she had lived in America for a long time. The man wanted to speak further but was not able to speak. Hannah fed him gently with a spoon made of porcelain. The man did not want to eat, but still he ate. Now you will soon be strong, she said, not liking him and yet moved to comfort him. He did not answer. When Sadao came in the third day after the operation, he found the young man sitting up, his face bloodless with the effort. So as Anna, she fed the man, she said that soon he would become strong. She said so despite the fact that she disliked him. The man did not reply to her. And when Sadao visited the man on the third day after the operation, the young boy was sitting, but his face was pale and weak due to the effort that he had made while sitting. Lie down, Sadao cried. Do you want to die? He forced the man down gently and strongly and examined the wound. You may kill yourself if you do this sort of thing, he scolded. So, when he found that his face was pale and weak due to the effort that he had made while sitting, Sadao screamed at him and ordered him to lie down. He said that the man would die if he stressed himself. What are you going to do with me? The boy muttered. He looked just now barely 17. Are you going to hand me over? So when Sadao forced him down and inspected the wound that he had operated upon, he scolded the man that he could die if he tried to exert himself. The boy asked Sadao that what would he do with him now. It seemed that the boy was hardly 17 years old. He asked Sadao that would he hand him over to the Japanese army. For a moment, Sadao did not answer. He finished his examination and then pulled the silk quilt over the man. I do not know myself what I shall do with you, he said. I ought, of course, to give you to the police. You are a prisoner of war. No, do not tell me anything. He put up his hand as he saw the young man was about to speak. Do not even tell me your name unless I ask it. So, when the injured man asked him that whether Sadao is going to hand him over to the Japanese army. Sadao did not reply instantly. He completed examining the boy and then put the silk quilt on him. Sadao said that he himself did not know what he should do with the boy. He added that he was supposed to hand him over to the police. He also disclosed that he knew that the boy was a prisoner of war. As Sadao saw that the boy was about to speak, he raised his hand to indicate him not to do so. He even asked him not to speak and not to tell his name also unless he asked him to do so. They looked at each other for a moment, and then the young man closed his eyes and turned his face to the wall. Okay, he whispered, his mouth a bitter line. Outside the door, Hannah was waiting for Sadao. He saw at once that she was in trouble. So here Sadao and the boy they exchanged glances, and then the boy he closed his eyes and turned his face towards the wall. He said okay in a low voice as he felt bitter by Sadao's words. And outside the door Hannah was waiting for Sadao. He saw that she was in some sort of a trouble. Now we'll stop here and we'll continue in the next video. Thank you.